To most people, he looked like just an old man on a noisy, rusted motorcycle. But when officers pulled him over and began mocking him, they had no idea who they were dealing with. He did not argue. He did not resist. He simply waited. 9 minutes later, the sound of roaring engines shattered the silence. 50 soldiers stepped out of military Humvees, and what happened next would leave the entire town speechless. Because James Harris was not just a man, he was history in motion. The sun had just started rising over the sleepy edge of town when James Harris, 82, rolled to a stop at a red light. His weathered hands rested steady on the handlebars of his old 1970 Harley Davidson. The bike rumbled like a beast, not loud from pride, but from age and power. He wore a faded canvas jacket and black gloves worn thin from years of work. His eyes, sharp and still, stared ahead like they always had, calm and alert. He had only meant to ride into town for a part to fix his broken tractor, the same tractor he had fixed himself 100 times before. He did not need help, never had. But when the patrol car pulled up behind him, lights flashing, James knew trouble had come looking. The door swung open and a young officer stepped out, Officer Ava Johnson. She was no older than 30, sunglasses gleaming, hand already resting on her holstered sidearm. Her tone was sharp. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said, stepping toward him. "Sir, I need license and registration, and shut off that bike." James did not argue. He reached slowly into his jacket and handed her a worn leather wallet. His documents were stacked neatly, well kept, but she barely glanced at them. 82 years old? She said aloud, loud enough for a passing pedestrian to hear. "Don't you think you're a little too old to be riding a motorcycle?" Another officer joined her, Officer Lopez. He smirked as he examined the bike. "Man, this Harley's older than my dad," he joked. "Look at all that rust." They searched the bike. They searched him. For no reason. There was no incident, no traffic violation, just suspicion wrapped in disrespect. "Sir, hands on the bike, feet apart," Johnson ordered. James did as he was told, not because he feared them, but because he knew something they did not. A small crowd began to gather across the street. Whispers rose. Some people shook their heads, others chuckled. Most just watched, recording silently. Officer Johnson's voice cut through again. "Where do you live?" James replied calmly, "On a farm, just outside town. Been there 40 years. "Alone?" "Yes." The officers exchanged glances. It was the kind of look people give when they have already made their minds. "Do you have any family?" Lopez asked, his tone now tinged with pity. "I have been taking care of myself longer than either of you have been alive," he said, still looking straight ahead. But the officers were not listening anymore. They were caught up in their own story. A confused old man, a dangerous old motorcycle, maybe even someone who needed to be taken in for his own safety. And as they decided what to do next, off to the side, unnoticed, a man stepped out of the nearby gas station. His name was Marcus Williams, Gulf War veteran, gas station owner, and he had known James Harris for over 15 years. He saw what was happening, and he felt something boiling in his chest, because he knew who James Harris really was. And as Officer Johnson raised her voice again, threatening to take James in for a psychiatric evaluation, Marcus picked up his phone and called the Fort Carson military base. "This is urgent," he told the voice on the other end. "You need to come now. They're humiliating Colonel James Harris in black daylight." Part 2. James Harris stood alone, hands behind his back, pride intact, but across the street, someone had made a call. And while two officers laughed and lectured him like a confused old man, engines were already roaring down the road. They had stopped the wrong bike. And now an entire military unit was coming. Soldiers who had once been trained by the very man being humiliated. What happened next would not just silence the crowd, it would remind everyone what respect really looks like. "You need to come with us, sir, now." Officer Johnson's voice was louder now, firmer. The kind of voice that says she has already made her decision, no matter what is right. James stood still. "For what charge?" he asked calmly. "Failure to respond, suspicious behavior, possibly medical instability," she replied, not even looking him in the eye. "We'll have you evaluated, just a routine check." James exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. The truth is, she had no legal ground to take him in. No complaint, no incident, just a judgment based on age, appearance, and assumption. He had faced much worse than this. But the difference was, back then, he was surrounded by men who understood honor. Now he was being judged like a threat for sitting on his own motorcycle. Lopez stepped closer. "Come on, Mr. Harris, a man of your age, what if your reflexes are off? What if your vision's bad?" James met his eyes. "You would be surprised how sharp everything still is." But they were not listening. They never had been. Behind them, the small crowd was now larger, phones held high, some people whispering, others shaking their heads. A few spoke up. "Is this really necessary? Man, he looks like he knows exactly what he's doing. Leave him alone." But the officers stood firm, and James stood alone. Across the street, Marcus gripped the phone tightly, heart pounding. He had told the military dispatcher everything. The disrespect, the mocking, the threats. There had been a pause. Then the voice on the other end had shifted, serious, quiet, almost stunned. "Did you say Colonel James Harris?" "Yes," Marcus said. "He's right outside my station, being treated like a criminal." "We're sending a unit," the voice said firmly. "Do not let them take him. We'll be there in minutes." Marcus hung up and stepped to the edge of the road, silently watching. Back at the Harley, Officer Johnson's tone turned harsher. "Mr. Harris, last chance, get in the cruiser." "I'm not going," he said plainly. "You do not have a choice." James smiled slightly, just the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that doesn't mock, it remembers. The kind of smile worn by someone who has waited for real battles, not petty confrontations. He waited for real battles many times before, for longer than any of those officers had lived. He always had a choice. Then, a sound. Faint, low, but growing. Officer Lopez looked up first. "What is that?" "The engines." The crowd turned their heads as dust rose at the far end of the road. 12 Humvees, barreling down the two-lane street, their tires throwing up gravel, their formation tight, practiced, military. Officer Johnson squinted, stepping forward slightly. Marcus crossed his arms. "Told you," he muttered. The Humvees came to a hard stop around the intersection, forming a semicircle around the entire scene. Doors flew open. Boots hit the pavement in unison. 50 soldiers stepped out, uniformed, coordinated, unblinking. The kind of movement only drilled by training, by discipline, by loyalty. The lead vehicle opened last, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered officer. His boots clicked as he approached the officers. His voice, clear, commanding, cut through the thick silence. Who stopped? Colonel James Harris. Officer Johnson froze. The crowd gasped. Lopez whispered, "Colonel?" The captain stepped forward again, his words like thunder. "You stopped the wrong man."
Officer Johnson thought she was dealing with an elderly man past his prime. But when a military captain stepped from a Humvee and saluted James Harris, the entire street froze. Cameras kept rolling, mouths fell open. Because the man they had mocked for riding a rusty motorcycle was not just any old veteran. He was a living legend. The air changed, and for the first time in years, James Harris did not have to defend himself. The uniformed world had come to do it for him. The soldiers' boots stopped just feet from the officers. "Colonel James Harris," the captain said again, loud enough for everyone to hear. His eyes locked onto Officer Johnson. "You pulled over a man who served 3 tours in Vietnam, trained military intelligence operatives in Iraq and Afghanistan, and holds 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Distinguished Service Cross." A silence fell so heavy it felt like the air itself had frozen. Officer Johnson stammered, her voice suddenly small. I did not know who he was, sir." The captain's face remained still. "And yet you ordered a public search, called him unstable, threatened medical detainment, all without cause." Lopez shifted uncomfortably beside her. We were just following protocol. We thought—" "You thought wrong," the captain snapped. "This man trained me and 50 other soldiers standing behind me." Every single soldier took a synchronized step forward. The crowd gasped. Several people filming let out audible wows. The energy in the air flipped like a switch. James Harris still stood calmly beside his Harley, arms folded behind him, not smug, not angry, just quietly watching. For years, he had endured small humiliations, whispers, looks, doubts, but never had they collided like this, with cameras, with soldiers, with a crowd bearing witness. The captain turned again. "Do you have any idea who you stopped?" Johnson tried to gather herself. "I just saw an old man on a dangerous motorcycle. We've had incidents before." "And this is how you respond? With threats? With hands on your weapon?" One of the soldiers stepped forward now, a young woman, Sergeant Diaz. Her voice was clear and steady. "Colonel Harris was the reason I stayed in the military. When my father died, he helped me stay focused. He made me believe I mattered." Another soldier added, "He taught us integrity, discipline, how to lead with compassion. He's a hero to all of us." Johnson swallowed hard. Her hands, once confident on her hips, now trembled slightly by her side. The crowd began clapping, a slow, steady ripple that grew louder. People were cheering, honking, some even crying. A man from the back yelled, "Colonel Harris, thank you for your service." The phones were still rolling, but the mood had shifted entirely. James Harris finally stepped forward, not to gloat, not to scold, but to speak. He looked at Johnson, then Lopez, and said, "I do not need an apology. I need you to learn from this." He pointed gently to the soldiers behind the captain. "These men and women behind you, they do not wear uniforms for praise. They do it for protection, for honor, and for justice. If you wear a badge and forget those things, you become the problem." No one moved. No one spoke. The truth was loud enough. The captain gave one final nod. "Colonel Harris, if you would allow us, we would be honored to escort you home." James nodded once softly. He mounted his Harley. As the engine came alive with its signature growl, the soldiers climbed back into their Humvees, surrounding him in perfect formation. And just like that, the man they tried to silence rode away like a general leading an army through his hometown. But the story was not over yet, because the footage, with those bystanders captured, was about to explode across the country. The footage of a decorated war hero being humiliated went viral within hours. People were outraged. The officers who mocked him were now under investigation, while James Harris, the quiet man on the motorcycle, became a national symbol of dignity and strength. But for James, it was never about attention. It was about being seen, not for his age or his silence, but for the life he had lived. And in the end, America saw him, loudly, proudly, finally. By nightfall, the story had hit every major network. Elderly veterans stopped and searched. Turns out he's a decorated war hero. 82-year-old veteran escorted by 50 soldiers after wrongful stop. Colonel James Harris, the man behind the motorcycle. The cell phone videos posted by bystanders were shared millions of times. Comment sections filled with gratitude, outrage, and tears. Strangers from every corner of the country began writing letters, sending emails, leaving voicemails at the town hall. Some asked how they could help. Others simply said, "Thank you." And while the world reacted, Officer Johnson and Officer Lopez were placed on immediate administrative leave. The department released a public statement acknowledging misconduct and pledging new training. But for many, it was too little too late. In an interview days later, Captain Farrell, who had led the Humvees that day, spoke with a stern face and tearful eyes. James Harris saved lives in 3 wars. He shaped the lives of officers across generations. The fact that anyone, let alone a police officer, could humiliate him on a public street, it still haunts me. He paused. "But I'm proud we showed up, proud we stood by him." As for James, he returned to his quiet farm outside town. He never asked for any of it. But letters began arriving, from military academies, from congressmen, from children. One letter came from a 10-year-old boy in Nebraska. "Dear Colonel Harris, I saw your story. My dad is in the Army and he says you're a real hero. I want to be like you. I want to ride a motorcycle too. Thank you for being strong." He kept that one on his fridge. 2 weeks later, the mayor held a public ceremony. Flags lined the street. Hundreds showed up. Veterans from every branch stood tall in dress uniform. When he was invited on stage, he hesitated. He had spent most of his life avoiding spotlights. But when he stepped up to the mic, the entire crowd fell silent. "I did not serve for attention. I served so people could walk free, even if they do not always walk right." His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the gravity of a life fully lived. "I do not need medals. I do not need parades. I just want the next man or woman who looks like me, who is older, who rides something rusted and loud, to be treated with a little more dignity." Applause thundered through the crowd. He ended with only 4 words: "Respect is not optional." Later, the Department of Defense awarded him an honorary distinction for lifetime service, courage, and character. But back on his farm, James remained the same. Up at 5 a.m., tinkering with that tractor, riding into town on that same old Harley. Only now, when he pulled up to the gas station, people stood a little straighter. Strangers offered smiles, veterans gave nods, and no cop ever stopped him again. Because when the wrong man gets stopped and the right people show up, the world remembers.